South Africa's cartels aren't lurking in the shadows. They are sitting in plain sight, and few people have mapped that world more fearlessly than Caryn Dolley, investigative journalist at Daily Maverick and author of Clash of the Cartels. From Cape Town gang bosses cutting deals with international syndicates to police generals accused of working hand in hand with criminals, Dolley's work exposes how organized crime has captured parts of the state. And now with the Mkhwanazi Commission probing just how deep the rot goes, we sit down with the journalist who has spent years following the money, the bodies, and the lies. Caryn Dolley, thank you so much for joining us on SMWX.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Your book, if one were to summarize it, Clash of the Cartels, is about how global criminal syndicates are influencing South Africa and how South African criminal networks also have a global reach. There's a really fascinating map right at the front where you chart all these different places and how they link to South Africa. How would you summarize that global network and how it influences South Africa?
I don't even think there is a way to summarize it because it is so sprawling. So even though the book goes into countless, numerous conduits, it is so much bigger than what is distilled here. And we always say organized crime in South Africa, or, a Brazilian cartel is operating via South Africa. I hope the book conveys the idea that this is transnational organized crime. South Africa is part and parcel of transnational organized crime. We could see one shooting in a very specific neighborhood and think, a random sort of incident that happened, and it may actually link to a cartel boss sitting in another country with henchmen around the world. So, to me, in a nutshell, this book is terrifying, and it is such a fragment of an explosive snapshot that, it highlights where South Africa is positioned, and it almost amplifies what is happening now, as you said, with the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry into Mkhwanazi's accusations.
It's a really important intervention because, as you say, when we think of the problem of crime in South Africa, when we think of the drug trade, we often think about that in terms of our own domestic politics. But the way that you really extend that picture is locating us within a much broader and deeper international criminal network, which has its tentacles very, very deeply in South Africa.
Yeah, and we may think that what we're seeing is new and what we're hearing is new, like there may be a drug cartel headquartered in Gauteng, which is in control of a criminal syndicate. But if you look back years, if you look back decades, what we're actually seeing is a manifestation of what has been happening all along. And I'm going to just focus on one case involving a man from India. He's now a convict. He was detained a few years ago in Kenya. His name is Vicky Goswami. His full name is Vicky Goswami. I think it was either 2019 in the US. He was extradited from Kenya to the US, where he testified we were hell-bent on dominating South Africa's drug trade. He even testified about a murder that happened. It appears the murder happened in South Africa and that it was ordered from Kenya. And that's just explosive because we don't actually know anything about these people. But if there is an individual, just one individual in one country saying, hey, I was in another country and I was sending drugs to South Africa via these people, it immediately implies a very well-oiled network. And that's just one person. So if you look at all these different networks operating and sort of expand and multiply it into all these different channels, it would explain why it would explain the volatility between certain gangs and certain organized crime groups, and also give us a little more context as to why they are, different factions sort of fighting each other. And then if we overlay the idea that certain police officers are aligned with these factions, it then opens us up into what's happening into the police service and also politically.
The Vicky Goswami part in the book really stood out to me. And this is a quote from him, which you quote, which is, he said, "I know ANC leaders and contributed to the ANC and the struggle." So, wow. I mean, this is one of the few glimpses that we get into a potentially much longer story of the way that crime, even the drug trade perhaps, and the ANC during its period of being banned, but also in the democratic transition, at least according to Mr. Goswami, was entangled in these webs.
Well, according to Mr. Goswami, if we believe those words of his, he's saying he was acquainted with ANC figures. He's not necessarily implicating ANC figures in any drug trafficking. But if you turn to other individuals, and if you look at my most recent book, Man Alone, there is this idea that while the apartheid government was involved in manufacturing and disseminating drugs, including mandrax, to make money and fight the apartheid machine, those fighting for liberation had to resort to unorthodox methods because they were basically banned in the country. They couldn't do so through legitimate means. And that's where this idea that individuals who fought for South Africa's democracy were also involved in drug trafficking. Now, it's on record in Daily Maverick that the ANC has denied ties to any drug trafficking. But again, it does create this impression that if certain individuals are to be believed, there are figures in the current government who were, I don't want to even say complicit, because at that stage, they weren't necessarily doing it for criminal intent, but to free the country. The question is, if that was the case, did everyone stop doing that once we became a democracy? Or is what we're seeing now a continuation of apartheid channels, which have sort of just, I almost want to say, have become a bit of a free-for-all with everyone jumping on and trafficking drugs?
The money that is being trafficked, being used in funding, as Mr. Goswami says, he contributed to the ANC here. So the question, I guess at this point, maybe it's $1 million question as we go into the Mkhwanazi Commission, how much of the proceeds domestically are, and not just in the ANC, but are actually seeping into our politics as a whole?
That's such a, as you say, it's a, I want to say $1 billion/euro question. And it also brings up the question, is there such a thing as clean money at this point? Because if we look at how cartels operate and the way or gangs operate, gangs, cartels, whatever you like to call them, the way they launder money is via legitimate businesses, etc. And that's how it trickles down, and that's how we could be, we could be dealing in drug money without even realizing it.
And you mentioned your most recent book, Man Alone. Also, before Clash of the Cartels, you wrote To the Wolves, and these are all fascinating stories about crime and its influence on South African life and law enforcement. I was interested in Clash of the Cartels and how you drew this history of apartheid as well, mentioning how drugs have always been used as a weapon by the apartheid state to subdue the black population. And that crisis is kind of the birth of how this problem has perpetuated in our society. Take us through that, because I think that's a really important piece of the history of this that we often don't see, and the way that drugs were weaponized towards apartheid's ends.
Absolutely. So there are documents, TRC documents that go into this. That's the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But yeah, if you speak to people over the years, police officers, residents, even individuals who became gangsters and who have either spent time in prison or went on to spend time in prison, they'll all tell you that under apartheid, it was known that the apartheid government was manufacturing and spreading out drugs, okay? It's believed that some of that, for example, mandrax, which is a sort of a downer, subdues you, was to be used, or there were chemicals to be used for crowd control, keeping people subdued, keeping them under your control. What's really key here is that when we look into drug trafficking conduits going way back, there's this constant I don't want to say suspicion, it's stronger than suspicion, but there is this understanding that certain gang bosses, particularly here in the Western Cape, paired up with under apartheid police officers. And it's almost a replica of the suspicions and accusations we're seeing now, that these gang bosses paired up with police officers and they were used to sort of spread out drugs and use their networks, their gang networks, to disseminate and distribute what they were basically tasked with doing. And that's one thing that's really stuck with me through all the books, is that we see the same suspicions, the same accusations, the same claims, the same beliefs that existed around the 1990s still exist today, even with the Commission of Inquiry that is about to start. It's startling that the same accusations, especially in the Western Cape, because that's where I'm from, that's what I've focused on mainly, but we've had police officers saying it before. We've had court cases where you've heard that in the 1990s, a police officer alleged that organised crime suspects were paired up with politicians and figures in government. That police officer then gets sidelined. And whether that police officer is speaking truth or spoke truth or not, the fact remains is that the very same suspicions that existed back then are still in existence, which suggests that either something didn't end, these crimes were being committed and they were sort of inherited, or I don't even know if there is a second option. It just feels like this is the situation we're in is such a long time coming.
Yeah, the evil of apartheid just knew no bounds, but you added another layer to my understanding of that. I had an appreciation for the way alcohol was used, but I didn't realize it extended even beyond that. The real core of the book is just showing how these networks that exist outside South Africa have influence and in some ways have penetrated into South Africa, and you do so geographically. So can we start with Latin America and South America? Because you've got Brazil, you've got Cuba, you've got Colombia, and you speak about how different networks from these parts of the world see South Africa as a key hub for drug trafficking and for international crime. So talk us through that.
Of course. So I will focus on Brazil because that is where a lot of cocaine has been pushed from into and through South Africa. And if we just use that as an example, you'll see that Durban Harbour is preferred. Global drug traffickers prefer using the harbour there. Again, we need to highlight the fact that these are coastal areas. We do have a coastline. I think any country with a coastline at this point is going to be targeted by traffickers. And you focused on specific countries. So like you mentioned, Brazil. But what I want to point out is that different cartels in very different part of the world operate together. So we could have Brazil, Serbia, and Italy, for example, different groupings, all with the same intent. And I think that's what makes it really difficult and infuriating to try and sort of analyze this and like, why can't we crack down on this? Well, because it's sort of the might of several criminal organizations. And remember, we're talking multiple languages, multiple ideas, multiple thought patterns, different upbringings. And at the same time, once those drugs land on our shore, it means that there are networks and conduits in place. So that's where it would appear that local groups have sort of enmeshed themselves into different countries. And that's why I say this is transnational, because whatever lands in South Africa from whichever country, there needs to be a system in place here for the drugs to get from point A to point B to point C. So, yeah.
You spoke there about Europe as well. And in the book, you talk about Italy, you talk about Eastern Europe, you talk about Ireland. And so this is not just about countries from the global south or developing countries. There's also this is a sophisticated network which runs from the global north, global south, Europe, Asia, Africa, Latin America, South America, North America. But give us further insights into the European connection, because that fascinated me, I must say.
So I'm going to focus on Serbia quickly because it's important to remember we're not just talking about individuals who are pushing drugs. We're talking about really deeply anchored networks, established networks. So in Joburg a few years ago, there was a spate of shootings involving individuals from Serbia. We don't know on record what the official reasons for those killings were, but it appeared that it was linked to the cocaine trade. Okay, and if we sort of backpedal a little and look at the so-called underworld, I say so-called because the underworld is all around us. If we look at that, there have always been these suspicions that Eastern European operatives paired up with intelligence agents, whether they're rogue or legitimate is another story, but they paired up with intelligence agents in South Africa to establish these drug networks. And yeah, like we've had several assassinations involving Serbian individuals. If we sort of jump back to Brazil, we're looking at Primeiro Comando de Capital. That's one of their most potent, I would say, criminal grouping. And we've had the head of that gang temporarily in South Africa before fleeing to Mozambique, where he was arrested. So there is evidence of these individuals. And like you say, it's so difficult to sort of see it in these fractals, because everyone's working together. And the worst part is that's actually not okay to say, because everyone's not working together. And that's where we see these sort of combustions, these clashes. But in Dubai, I think it was possibly 2 or 3 years ago, there was a series of arrests around the world, and Dubai was also focused on because it was believed that a super cartel was actually headquartered there. And in my work for Daily Maverick, I managed to trace one of the drug shipments that I think it was linked to the Netherlands. Somehow made its way to Durban, and through that shipment you could see that the so-called super cartel in Dubai is also linked to South Africa. They were also operating by way of South Africa.
Terrifying stuff. One last geographical element is Asia, both South Asia and East Asia. India, we've mentioned Mr. Goswami. China as well, you also speak about. So there's also a route from the East that is crucial to understanding the situation in South Africa as well.
Yes, there's a route from the East, and we mustn't forget that to make drugs, you need certain chemicals, you need certain, you need certain substances. So if you look at China, for example, it's known from a South African perspective, it's known as a precursor destination where you get your chemicals to make the drugs. So then that also expands these networks further, because it shows you can't just be a trafficker. You need to know where to get your precursor chemicals to make that drug. You need the infrastructure to actually make the drug. So we're talking, I don't want to say a laboratory, but these drug factories, etc. And if you look at the illicit steroid trade, which I focus on in the book, you'll see that steroids were sourced in Moldova, and those networks connected to China, and that connected to Ireland. And then we've had a murder in 2017 in Constantia in Cape Town of someone who was actually convicted of steroid trafficking, who was initially from Ireland. He ended up here, and he was wanted in the US at the time of his killing. So that again just shows you how sort of, it's so connected. It's a knot.
But it makes a lot of sense, because there's a sense in South Africa where you're like, no, man, what's going on here? Like, there's something deeper than just even the malice of our own terrible political class. Like, there's some hidden influence, or there are many hidden influences, and you help to uncover at least one of them, which is these international criminal cartels. I wonder how this was published in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. And the interesting question for me, as you alluded to earlier, is that there's been a lot of investigative reporting on this. But something about the Mkhwanazi moment has brought this conversation right to the forefront of the public imagination in South Africa. And I wonder how you reflect on how General Mkhwanazi's press conference has actually underscored a lot of the work that you've been doing for many years.
Well, thank you for seeing it that way, because we're about to hear more allegations from General Mkhwanazi, and whether they are found to be fact-based or whether they're found to be something else, I just want to point out that regardless of that, focus is being placed on where it is most needed, and it's on these sort of shadowy networks we often hear about, we get to write about now and then, but you don't really have the names and very specific details to add parameters to these sort of amorphous ideas that, yes, there are cartels operating in South Africa. And we sometimes hear about it. We sometimes see through arrests what's happening. We see through drug seizures, interceptions, etc. But this is the first time, it almost makes me want to cry, but this is the first time in a very long time as a journalist I feel not that I'm personally being heard, but the issues I'm writing about, the issues that are impacting so many people in utterly tragic ways, I feel that that will finally be focused on, and maybe somehow we will see a little, that needle, maybe we see it inch a little in the right direction, and residents on the ground who are so far removed from cartels, from organized crime, white collar, whatever, residents who are suffering the brunt of what this truly produces, I hope that this gives them a little bit of relief.
What are your expectations for the commission, and what do you make of the actual specific allegations of this Gauteng-based cartel potentially influencing Minister Senzo Mchunu, and goodness knows how else and who else, and how high it goes?
So I
know you've been writing about that in Daily Maverick as well.
I want to just lighten the tone. So I'm a journalist. We have no expectations. But for this particularly, no. I don't want to say I expect, so I'm going to go with the word hope again. But I really hope we get some understanding of what's happening within policing structures, law enforcing structures, so that there is almost like a ripple effect of clean and decent intent that finds its way to where it's most needed. And I'm sitting in the Western Cape. We have a ginormous gang murder toll. What we're speaking about, what is going to be heard in that commission, it may not seem like it, but it is undoubtedly connected to what's happening on the ground. So again, I just hope we get to hear names, we get to see accountability, and that people who are most affected by activities which are unrelated to their everyday lives but are dictating their lives get relief.
I know you followed this probably more closely than anyone, or at least most in South Africa. What would you ask Mkhwanazi, or what do you think some of the key questions for Mkhwanazi would be as the commission unfolds? And maybe even other people who he's implicated.
I would like to know when all this truly started. It surely can't be that a drug cartel or an alleged drug cartel popped up. Where did this all start? I think what we can agree on without hearing anything from the commission is that there are there is fragmentation within the South African Police Service and within law enforcing structures. That is fact. Why does that exist? For how long has it been going on? If there is a drug cartel operating in South Africa, for how long has it been here? Who is involved in it? Which politicians are connected to that? I would love to see wishful thinking, but I would love to see a diagram, an infographic that connects individuals. I'd like to know who is making money from the crimes they're professing to prevent and which are killing people around them. Do these people exist? I'd also like to find out, I mean, if we're really going to go into nitty-gritty detail here, I'd love to find out if things like Vicky Goswami's accusations, allegations, claims, whatever they may be, have been investigated. And I'd like to know why we as the public aren't ever updated on that. I'd also, now I'm going a bit off, but why has it taken so long to get here? Like, why did it take someone having to stand up on a Sunday and make these very astounding accusations for something to happen when we've had high-profile murders of whistleblowers, of a police officer, of, I believe, lawyers, of auditors. Like, why did it take so long? Who is truly in control of South Africa?
Yeah, I think one thing, as you say that I'm really interested to discover, and goodness knows where this is going to lead. I actually don't think it will only be within the ANC. This could affect opposition parties of all kinds of stripes. But I do want to know, those people who wield public power, how much do they know and how much did they know about these allegations before, and what did they do, if anything? And if they did nothing, why did they not do anything? And I'm talking everyone from President Cyril Ramaphosa down, because one of the things that baffles me at the moment is, I'm pretty sure, like you say, Mkhwanazi didn't just wake up and say, okay, well, I'm going public. He probably went through some stages of consultation and at least warning or trying to blow the whistle internally. So I'm very keen to know what Minister of Police knew, apart from his implications, Deputy President, the President, anyone in the security cluster, and also previous people in the security cluster. How much of this did they know and were they sitting on before?
Exactly. And how, again, like, I can't reiterate this enough, but for how long has this been going on for? And if there are books, and I'm not just talking Clash of the Cartels, we've seen Jeff Wicks come out with his book now. How many investigative journalists and journalists have written books on these very issues? And yet things have just sort of plodded along with a glitch here and there. Someone gets murdered. There's a sense of outcry, national outrage, etc., and things go further along. I would love to know if this is really a day of reckoning, and by day I mean like a few weeks. But yeah, like, will we get to find out who has toyed with our safety? Ultimately, that's what I would like to know.
On the personal level, Caryn, I watched an interview that you did with Mandy Wiener when you were launching your book, and you said that you decided to take your launches, or at least some of them, online because you were worried about your personal safety. I mean, that must have been quite a jarring experience to realize you've got this great book and you want to share it with the public, but you've also got to be wary of your own personal safety.
So the weirdest thing is that when you're writing about this, the best, I'm going to use the word gangster here, but I don't mean it in the sense you may understand it, but I mean the best gangster, the best thug, the best organized criminal is the one you don't know about. So even though I've named so many people in this book, our concern was, who am I actually upsetting? Because inevitably these people could be puppets. And the puppet masters could be sitting in supremely high positions of power. And that was what ultimately made us decide that let's not play around. These are very bad people. I don't even think I managed to count the number of murders in this book. We were trying at one stage and it made me feel so sick at some point that I had to just stop. Yeah.
It's a tough read from that perspective. Tough in a, I mean, I don't know if I can say tough in a good way, but because it reveals the truth. But like, each chapter has these vignettes and these stories where you're trying to like follow these links through the stories of specific individuals and what happens to them. And it's a gruesome and violent and terrifying world.
And yet it's happening around us all the time. That's what really blows my mind, is that we think of ourselves as separate to all this, and we think, oh, a drug cartel, or oh, kingpins, etc. But this is so much more than that. And as gruesome as it is, it's also sort of drug money being pumped through legitimate, or maybe we shouldn't call them legitimate businesses if they're knowingly pumping that money for traffickers, etc. But it really shows how what's happening around us, what we perceive as sort of very safe, cushioned environment, may be anything but that. And I also hope the book shows something else, follow the money. So we could assume that gangsterism is sort of these spates of shootings in intense areas which are known as historic gang hotspots, but gangsterism itself is something a little different. It's money laundering, it's infiltrating legitimate business, it's getting government contracts, it's how do I say, turning aspects of private security inside out to suit your dubious deeds. So it really is happening all around us. And I think, this book really opened my eyes to what is very obvious. I know it's happening. I've been to murder scenes, but it really brings on a different texture to it all.
That last thing you said absolutely terrifies me. This idea that criminal elements can capture private security, so that when you're like, okay, the police could be captured, so that which is supposed to protect you is already captured. But then you think when you walk into a place where there's private security, okay, at least I'm staying. Goodness knows, like people have cameras in their houses linked to private security companies. And then if those private security companies get infiltrated by criminal networks, then where do we go?
Well, my first book, The Enforcers, focused on private security, specifically aspects in Cape Town, where it was accused, all the other words again, that some companies were used as fronts for criminal suspects. Some of them may now be convicted. So these were sort of front security companies. And I remember some sources actually explained to me that some individuals use the guise of private security as a legal means to get hold of firearms, which they then use for illegal means. So, this is such a weird memory that just sort of popped up. But I think in 2017, 2018, when I was covering what we viewed as sort of nightclub security skirmishes in Cape Town, one night outside a club in the city centre here in Cape Town, I was tipped off that something was going to happen. I didn't know what the something was. I got there, saw a group of men all standing outside this venue. It was dark. One of them had what I thought was like something along his legs, and I wasn't sure what it was, and it turned out to be a firearm, a huge firearm, a shotgun if I'm not mistaken. And that was at the height of the so-called nightclub security battles or skirmishes, and that really opened my eyes to what we're sitting with. These aren't just statistics or claims, it's very real. And we've seen court cases play out in Cape Town, and we've seen accused be criminally charged and then not criminally charged. We've had Mark Lifman, who was murdered in George in November 2024. His name was widely associated with sort of what some would say were rogue aspects of private security.
Well, Caryn, I mean, it's just testament to the breadth of your work. I must go and check out some other aspects of your work. I haven't read Man Alone yet, and To the Wolves I've looked at in preparation to understand Clash of the Cartels, but that's the one I've focused on mainly. And what was the first one, the name of the first one that you just alluded to now? The
Enforcers, Inside Cape Town's Deadly Nightclub Battles. Yeah, the first one actually connects perfectly with Clash of the Cartels, because at that time when I was looking into sort of nightclub security and these skirmishes relating to it, what police always said and what individuals within these sectors always said is that the person who controls the door of a venue controls what goes in and out of it. And that's where the idea that drugs may be pumped into certain venues arises from. So again, drug trafficking.
Well, Caryn, I don't want to take too much more of your time. You need to uncover more for us as we try to make sense of this Mkhwanazi moment. But thank you very much for the excellent work and brave work that you do. And it's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you. And thank you for amplifying our work. It's appreciated.
Keep it locked on SMWX. Help us get to our next milestone of 400,000 subscribers. Go and pick up Clash of the Cartels and read the archive of Caryn Dolley's work. And we'll see you on the next episode. Aye.